They found the German Shepherd, curled around the baby in the freezing rain. What the baby did next melted every heart. They said the storm would pass by morning. But when I found him, it was still raining. A German Shepherd, his fur heavy with water, curled tightly around something small, something fragile in the corner of a cracked concrete lot. The baby's breath was fogging against his chest. And though the night was bitter and the rain pressed down like glass, he never moved, never let her go. The parking lot was empty, abandoned, forgotten, just the light of a flickering street lamp catching the silver in his coat. Water ran in rivulets beneath him, pooling where the asphalt sagged. His body shook, but not from fear. He shook because he refused to stand, refused to leave the warmth of the child pressed against him. I don't remember breathing when I first saw them. I only remember the stillness of the way the world seemed to hush itself around that sight. A dog, battered and thin, with scars carved deep into his side, wrapped around a baby who had no voice to cry, only the faintest hum of breath, as if she already trusted him more than the storm, more than the night, more than me. This is how it began. With rain, with silence, with a creature too loyal to move, and a child too small to know the danger around her. I approached slowly, every step loud in my own ears. The shepherd lifted his head then, eyes cutting through the shadows. Burning gold even in the half-light. They were not wild, not angry, they were pleading. And yet there was a warning buried in them too, an unspoken promise that if I took one step too close, if I reached without understanding, he would not hesitate. He was not afraid of me. He was afraid of losing her. The baby stirred, a tiny hand, shifting from the folds of a damp blanket, pressing against the dog's chest. It was the smallest touch, nothing more than instinct. But he lowered his head at once, nudging her with a gentleness that did not belong to a creature hardened by scars and cold nights. His ears twitched with every drip of rain, yet his body remained still, a wall between her and the world. And in that quiet moment I felt something hollow in me tremble. Something I had kept locked away, buried beneath years of silence and guilt. I did not call out. I did not reach for them. I only stood there, rain slipping down my face, watching as the shepherd breathed in shallow rhythms, as if he had been holding on for hours, maybe days. His ribs pressed sharp against his skin, his coat matted and broken by time. But the baby slept. Somehow, against all reason, she slept. And I knew then whatever road had brought them here, it had not been kind. The streetlight flickered once more, then burned out, leaving us in the hush of rain and darkness. In the emptiness of that lot, with nothing but the sound of water and breath, I felt the weight of a story I was not ready to carry. Yet I also knew I could not walk away. This story will break you and then rebuild you. Like, share, and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. The rain did not stop that night. It came down in thin sheets, clinging to the air like it belonged there, as though the world had forgotten how to be dry. I stayed standing in that cracked parking lot longer than I should have, staring at the shepherd and the baby as if they were carved into the dark itself. He never moved, not when the thunder grumbled somewhere over the hills, not when the cold water trickled beneath his legs. He was anchored there, body pressed close to the child, as though some invisible command rooted him in place and stay, protect, endure. I wanted to move closer, but I didn't. Something inside me told me not to rush, not to break the fragile silence binding that moment together. The dog's eyes, those deep, molten eyes, tracked me carefully, his head lifting only slightly each time I shifted. He was tired, that much I could see, but even exhaustion could not loosen the grip he had on his duty. The baby stirred again, a small, choked whimper escaping her lips, and I thought my heart might stop. It was such a human sound, weak, lost, but alive. The shepherd bent his head lower, brushing his nose against her damp blanket, as if to remind her he was still there. The whimper faded into nothing, her breathing steadying against his chest. It was then I realized something that made my throat tighten. This wasn't the first night they had been like this. No dog collapses beside a child in the freezing dark, without a reason. No baby learns to rest in the arms of fur and scars unless it has happened before. They were bound already. threads of survival woven so tightly between them that I could only stand at the edge and witness. I don't know why. It struck me so deeply. Maybe because once years ago I too had stood in the rain with no one beside me. And maybe because in that moment, seeing them together, I saw what I had never been given. Protection without hesitation, loyalty without question. The shepherd shifted slightly, and that's when I noticed the mark on his flank. A patch where fur was missing, the skin beneath rough and puckered, an old wound healed but never forgotten. The kind of scar you don't get from simple misfortune, you earn it, through fire or accident or cruelty. My breath caught, but I didn't speak. The rain did enough speaking for us both. I tried to imagine the path that had carried him here. Perhaps he had once been someone's pride. A strong young dog standing tall in a backyard, chasing balls in the summer heat. Perhaps he had ridden in the back of a truck, head to the wind, before nights like this one stole all that softness from him. Or maybe he had never known gentleness at all. Maybe his first taste of the world had been the cold hand of neglect, the sting of hunger, the endless wandering through streets that never remembered his name. But what of the baby? That question pressed harder than the rain against my skin. She could not have been more than a year old, her cheeks soft and pale, her tiny fists clinging to the damp fabric of the blanket. She should have been inside, asleep in a crib under the hum of a lullaby machine. Not here, not beneath a storm, relying on the fragile warmth of a dog's body to keep her alive. The mystery of it weighed heavier with every passing second. They didn't belong here, not in this silence, not in this loneliness. Someone had left them or lost them or abandoned them to each other's care. And though I did not know it then, that mystery would unravel in fragments, like torn pages of a diary, scattered on the wind. I took one step closer. The shepherd's head lifted fully now, ears perked, his body tensing around the child. His lip curled not in full snarl but in warning. A quiet message. Enough. Stay back. I stopped, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I lowered myself to the ground, kneeling in the rain-soaked gravel. I did not want to tower over him. I wanted him to see that I was not another shadow coming to take what he guarded. For a long moment, we stared at each other. I could feel my knees soaking through, stones biting into my skin. But I stayed there, motionless, as if some part of me understood that patience was the only language he trusted. The baby shifted again, a tiny cough leaving her lips. Her blanket was soaked through thin fabric clinging to her like paper. She should have been shivering, but she wasn't. She was warm, only because he made her so. He had given her every last ounce of his heat, letting the rain punish him instead. And that, more than anything, told me the truth. He was not with her by chance. He was with her by choice. I leaned back slightly, letting the rain wash over my face, my breath uneven. For the first time in years, I felt something pressing against my chest that I could not ignore. A weight, but also a pull. As if their story was demanding to be carried even if I wasn't ready. And still in the silence, memories began to creep into me. Not theirs, my own. A hospital hallway, years ago. A white sheet pulled over a face. I loved the echo of footsteps as I walked out into the night alone. That was why the sight of them tore into me so deeply, because I knew what it meant to lose, and I knew what it meant to need. And here, before me, was a bond that refused to let either happen. The shepherd lowered his head again, resting it gently atop the baby's crown. His eyes never left mine, not for a second, and in them I saw a question, not spoken, not voiced, a question carved in silence. Will you help us, or will you leave? I had no answer, not yet. But I knew one thing: their story had not begun in this parking lot. It had begun somewhere else, someplace marked by pain and loss, and somehow, step by step, it had led them here, together. And if I wanted to understand, if I wanted to carry their story without breaking it, I would need to uncover those pieces. Slowly, gently, the way rain seeps into the cracks of stone, filling them not all at once but over time. The storm raged on, but I remained there on the ground, refusing to move, refusing to break the fragile thread of trust that was forming between us. And as the minutes stretched, I felt it the faintest shift in the shepherd's body. His muscles did not loosen fully, but they no longer burned with the same rigid tension. His gaze softened just barely, as though he understood that I was not another danger, not another thief. The baby's breathing steadied again, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath the rhythm of the storm. And in that sound, in that fragile pattern of life, I felt the first seed of something I hadn't known in years: hope. I lowered my head, closing my eyes, letting the rain wash away the fear clinging to me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was only the beginning, that the questions would deepen, that the truths would not be easy. But for now, it was enough just to sit there, breathing with them, waiting for dawn. Because sometimes the story doesn't reveal itself in answers. Sometimes it begins with silence, with the soft hum of rain, and with a child's breath fogging against the chest of a dog who refuses to let go. And that was where I chose to remain. The night pressed on, endless and heavy. Yet something told me the dawn would come, and with it the first pieces of their past would begin to emerge. Dawn did not arrive all at once. It crept into the world in faint shades of grey, soft and reluctant, as though the sky itself hesitated to disturb what it found below. I was still there, knees pressed into the damp gravel, body stiff from the cold. The rain had slowed, not stopped, leaving behind the heavy silence that follows a storm. The German shepherd had not moved through the long hours of night. His body remained curved around the child, forming a wall against everything beyond. His fur clung to his ribs in wet tangles, and every breath he took came with the faint rise and fall of exhaustion. Yet he endured. He had endured all night. The baby shifted in her sleep, a tiny gasp pulling through her lips. Her small hand reached blindly through the folds of her soaked blanket, pressing once again against his chest. And as if that touch commanded him, the shepherd stirred for the first time, lowering his head and brushing her hand with his nose. She stilled. The faintest hum left her throat, not quite a word, not quite a cry, just trust, made sound. I exhaled, slowly, my breath forming ghosts in the morning chill. It struck me how unnatural this scene should have been, a dog and a baby in an abandoned lot, guarded through the storm by loyalty alone. And yet, in its strangeness, there was a kind of order, a rhythm of survival I could not explain but could not deny. The shepherd lifted his head then, turning his gaze toward the horizon. His ears flicked with each sound: the drip of water from a rusted gutter, the distant groan of a passing truck. His eyes burned with a sharpness I could not look away from. He was remembering something. I could feel it. His stillness was not emptiness, it was memory threaded through with grief. I shifted my weight slightly, careful not to startle him. My hand brushed against the gravel, and it was then I noticed something half buried beneath the puddles, a scrap of fabric, torn and muddied, pressed against the edge of the lot. I reached for it slowly, lifting it free. It was not just fabric. It was part of a baby's blanket, not the one she was wrapped in now. This one was older, thinner, patterned, with faint shapes that time and rain had nearly erased. The edges were frayed, worn from hands that must have clutched it night after night. I turned it over in my palms, feeling the damp weight of it. And in that moment, the first fragment of their story spoke to me, not in words, but in the undeniable presence of this object. They had been here before, or near here, long enough to lose pieces of themselves to the ground. The shepherd's eyes followed the blanket in my hand. He did not growl, did not bare his teeth, but his gaze deepened, and for the first time I felt the full measure of his pain. That blanket was not just cloth, it was a memory, torn from somewhere behind them, carried into this place like a ghost that refused to leave. The baby stirred, again, as if responding to the memory. Her eyes fluttered open, pale, unfocused, searching. She did not cry. She only looked around, her gaze landing first on the shepherd, then drifting toward me. For the briefest second, our eyes met. And though she was too young to speak, too small to understand, I felt something pass between us, recognition perhaps, or maybe just the weight of silence pressing into her even now. The shepherd bent his head, pressing his nose against her forehead. She blinked once, then closed her eyes again, drifting back into sleep. He did not lift his gaze until he was sure she had settled. Only then did his eyes return to me. I placed the scrap of blanket gently back on the ground. It did not belong to me. It belonged to their story, to their path. And if I was to follow it, I would need to respect its weight. The light grew slowly, illuminating the scars that mapped his body. Old wounds, some healed to pale ridges, others still dark and angry. His right ear was torn at the edge, a jagged bite taken by time or violence. His paws were cracked, pads, raw from roads too long walked without rest. Every mark spoke of a journey carved in hardship. I wondered if he had once belonged to someone, if there had been a collar once, a hand that guided him, a voice that called him home. Dogs like him did not appear from nothing. He had been chosen once. He had been cared for, or at least claimed. Yet here he was, nameless and stripped of every tie, save for the child who clung to him as though he were the only thing she had left. The question clawed at me. Where were her parents? The lot was empty, the buildings around it silent and hollow. No voices called her name. No desperate searchers combed the streets. Only the three of us, bound by circumstance and silence. A truck passed on the far road, its tires splashing water from the gutters. The shepherd's ears flicked, his body tensing for an instant before settling again. Always alert, always ready. The world had taken much from him, but it had not taken his duty. The baby's breathing softened, her small body rising and falling beneath the weight of sleep. I watched the rhythm of her chest and felt the weight of time pressing against us. This moment could not last. Sooner or later the day would demand action. Someone would come, or I would have to carry them from this place. And yet, I lingered. Because in their stillness, I saw echoes of my own. I remembered nights when silence was all I had. Hospital corridors where footsteps faded, leaving me alone with memories I couldn't bear. I remembered rain-soaked roads I had walked without direction, hoping the storm would wash away the guilt I carried. And though I had never curled myself around a child, I knew what it meant to guard the last fragile piece of something you could not lose. The shepherd lowered his head once more, closing his eyes for a fleeting moment. And in that brief surrender, I saw the truth. He was not invincible. He was breaking. His body trembled with fatigue, his breaths uneven, yet still he held on. Still he gave everything he had to shield her, and I knew then, whatever had brought them here, it was not finished. Their journey was not over. The scrap of blanket lay between us, soaking deeper into the puddles, a relic, a clue. Somewhere someone had wrapped that child in love, or at least in the semblance of it. Somewhere the shepherd had learned to follow, to guard, to endure. Their stories were separate once, but now they were fused into one. I could not yet see the full picture, only fragments, but fragments were enough. The rain eased into a fine mist, the sky lightening at last. The world stirred awake, distant cars, faint voices, the hum of life returning. Yet in that forgotten corner, it felt as though time still held its breath. I shifted slightly, stretching the ache from my legs, and the shepherd's eyes snapped open again. He did not move, but his gaze sharpened. He was reminding me that trust was fragile, that every motion carried weight. I lowered my head, silent, acknowledging him. He held my gaze for a long moment, then blinked once, slow and deliberate. It was not permission, but it was not a refusal either. The baby stirred once more, this time letting out a soft sigh, her lips parting in the shape of something close to peace. Her breath rose into the cool air, visible for an instant before vanishing. And I thought then how fragile everything was, how quickly warmth could be stolen, how easily silence could become final. But for now, they had each other. And somehow, against all reason, they had me too. I did not know what the next hour would bring, nor the day that followed, but I knew this. I could not turn away, not now. Not after witnessing the scarred body of a shepherd refusing to surrender and the quiet breath of a child who trusted him with her life. Their story was still unfolding, and I would follow it step by step, fragment by fragment, until the truth revealed itself. The dawn finally broke through, pale light spilling across the wet asphalt. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though he too felt the weight of what was coming. And though silence still ruled that lot, it no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us could yet name. The first true light of morning spilled across the cracked asphalt, soft but steady, turning the pools of rain into mirrors. The world had shifted. The storm had passed, yet its memory clung to every surface, to every breath. And there we remained, the shepherd, the baby, and me bound in a silence that felt too heavy to disturb. The German shepherd lifted his head higher now, no longer crouched in the defensive curve he had held all night. His ears flicked toward the distant hum of life returning, the roll of tires on wet pavement, the faint clatter of a door opening somewhere across the street. He was tired, I could see it, but he would not allow that truth to break through. He was still the wall between her and everything else. The baby stirred in his arms. Her eyes blinked open again, wide this time, not the flutter of a dream, but the gaze of a child waking to the world. She didn't cry. I waited for it, the sharp wail of hunger, the startled sob of cold, but it never came. Instead, she shifted, a tiny hand slipping free from her blanket. Her fingers trembled in the air for a moment before pressing firmly into the shepherd's damp fur. And that single touch changed everything. He froze at first, body stiff, as though uncertain how to respond. But then slowly, cautiously, he bent his head, brushing her hand with his nose. She giggled, not loudly, not with the voice of a child who had known comfort for long, but softly. A sound so small it almost broke me. In the grey hush of the morning, it was the first true note of life. The shepherd's eyes softened then, not fully, not without their shadow of vigilance, but enough for me to see it, enough for me to feel the crack in the armor he had worn through the storm. The baby pressed, her hand deeper into his fur, fingers clinging to the damp strands as if she knew they belonged to her. She leaned into him without hesitation, resting her cheek against his chest. And in that simple, fragile movement, I saw a bond that had already been written long before I found them. I lowered myself closer to the ground, careful not to disturb them. The shepherd's gaze shot to me instantly, golden eyes sharp, but he did not bare his teeth. He simply watched, reminding me of my place at the edge of this circle. I stayed still, hands resting open on my knees. My chest ached with the weight of what I was witnessing, two beings who should have been broken by the night, finding instead in each other a quiet survival. The baby shifted again, her small body pressing more firmly against him. She reached out once more, her hand fumbling in the air, brushing against his torn ear. He flinched, the scarred edge twitching beneath her touch. For a moment, I thought, he would pull away, recoil from the memory that scar carried. But he didn't. He held still, letting her explore the wound with the innocence only a child could carry. And something in me trembled, because I knew what that meant. He trusted her. I let my eyes fall to the scrap of blanket still lying nearby, half buried in the wet gravel. It seemed almost symbolic now, a piece of the past trying to cling to the present. The baby had a new blanket, soaked and thin but still wrapped around her, yet here was the older one, forgotten, discarded, as if marking the trail of how far they had come. Her hand fell back against his chest, fingers curling into his fur. Her eyes fluttered shut again, a soft sigh leaving her lips as she drifted back toward sleep. And the shepherd bent his head low, breathing her in as though she were air itself. I watched them in silence, feeling the minutes stretch. The world around us continued waking, but in that lot, time seemed reluctant to move. The shepherd shifted his weight slightly then, the first true movement I had seen him make. His body lifted, not fully, but enough to reposition himself. Carefully, deliberately, he curled tighter around her, shielding her from the faint breeze that carried the last bite of the storm's cold. His ribs showed stark beneath his skin, each movement revealing how thin he had become. And yet his body remained a fortress, unyielding. The baby stirred at the shift, her eyes opening again. This time, her gaze found me, wide, unblinking, steady. It was not the gaze of a child who recognized me, not yet, but it was something, a pause, a question. I held her gaze, letting her see me without words, without movement. She did not smile, did not cry. She only looked. And in that quiet stare, I felt as though she was measuring me, not with the logic of an adult, but with the unspoken intuition. Children carry. The shepherd followed her gaze, his eyes landing on me again. His body tensed, protective, but he did not move between us. Instead, he lowered his head once more to her, pressing against her cheek, as if reminding her, "I am here. You are safe." And she believed him. I could see it in the way her body softened, in the way her hand reached again to hold his fur. The light grew warmer now, brushing the edges of the lot, illuminating the broken concrete and the water-stained walls of the buildings around us. But it did not change the feeling of confinement. The lot was still forgotten, still closed off from the world, and maybe that was why this bond felt so sharp, so unshakable, because in a place where nothing remained, they had chosen each other. I felt the weight of memory stirring again, my own ghosts pressing closer. A daughter I never held, a family I lost too soon. The way grief had driven me into silence for years. And now, here before me, a dog and a child rewriting what loss had tried to erase. The shepherd lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching toward the street. A sound I hadn't noticed was a car door slamming somewhere nearby. His body stiffened, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. He was ready even now to fight if needed, to defend the fragile life pressed against him. But the sound faded, no figure appearing. Slowly, his body eased again, though his eyes remained sharp. The baby stirred at his tension, her tiny brow furrowing as though she sensed the shift. She made a sound, soft and breathy, not a word, but close to one. A syllable born of instinct, and it melted against the air like a prayer. He responded, instantly, lowering his head, pressing his muzzle against her forehead. The sound still. Her body softened again, trusting him, only him. I felt tears threaten sharp against the back of my eyes, because at that moment I realized something undeniable. She saw him as home. Not the walls she had lost, not the parents, whose absence weighed like a question over everything. Him, the scarred, exhausted shepherd who had given her every ounce of warmth he had left. And he had accepted it. I carried it, protected it. The world would not understand that, not at first. They would see only a stray dog and a lost child. They would measure danger, risk, liability. But I saw something else. I saw a bond forged. In silence, in hunger, in storms. A bond that no law, no system could define. The morning sun rose higher, spilling light across the shepherd's fur. It revealed the streaks of grey threaded through the black, the signs of years already carried. He was not young, and yet, with the baby against him, he looked timeless, eternal. I remained where I was, unwilling to break the fragile circle. The questions pressed harder now. Where had they come from? How had they survived? What road had carved such scars into his body? But answers could wait. For now there was only this, the steady rhythm of her breath, the silent strength of his presence and the fragile space that held them both. And in that space, I felt something stir in me I had thought long gone. Not just grief, not just memory, but a whisper of purpose. The baby's hand lifted once more, brushing his fur, clinging to it as though it were all she knew, and he lowered his head, pressing against her touch. A child and a dog, alone, together, against the storm. It was not a coincidence. It was something deeper, something that would not let me walk away. And as the day unfolded, I knew the time was coming when silence would give way to choices. Choices that would test us all. But for now the child slept again, and the dog kept watch. And I stayed, breathing their story as it slowly, painfully, began to reveal itself. The sun climbed higher, soft but insistent, stretching its pale light across the empty lot. The storm had left behind a silence that was almost too perfect. Every sound carried further than it should. Every breath seemed louder. It was as though the world itself was listening. The shepherd had shifted again, carefully, his muscles trembling from the effort. He had curled more tightly around the baby, keeping her against his chest, though the day was warming. It wasn't just protection from the cold anymore. It was something deeper. He could not let her go, even if the danger had passed. The child stirred beneath his weight, her small hands fumbling outward, as though she was searching for something even in her half-dreams. Her fingers found his fur again, clinging tightly. She pressed her cheek against him, and her mouth moved in a sound too soft to be a word. Yet the shepherd responded instantly, lowering his head, brushing her with his nose. It was their language, wordless but binding. I watched in silence, feeling like an intruder in a story that was not mine. Yet the longer I stayed, the more I realized I could not walk away. Something in me had been waiting for this moment, though I had not known it. The baby opened her eyes fully then, pale, wide, searching. She looked at him first, always at him, her gaze steady and calm. Then slowly she turned toward me. Her lips parted slightly, her breath forming a soundless question. I lowered my head, not daring to speak. She blinked once, then twice. Her eyes heavy with a kind of quiet awareness children should not yet carry. And then she reached out, not to me, but toward the space between us. Her hand lingered in the air, fingers trembling with the weight of such a small gesture. The shepherd followed her movement, his eyes flicking from her hand to me. His body stiffened, a low sound caught in his throat, not a growl but a warning, a reminder of the boundaries that still held us apart. I did not move closer. I simply raised my hand, slowly, carefully, until it mirrored hers in the space between. Not touching, not bridging the gap, just close enough that the gesture could breathe. She blinked again, her hand drifting lower, returning to his fur. The shepherd bent his head, resting it firmly against her, as if sealing her back within his circle. And I understood then. Whatever bond I thought I might form with her would have to pass through him first. The morning stretched on. The lot grew warmer, the puddles shrinking beneath the sun's slow persistence. But the air held a weight I could not shake. This was not peace. It was a pause, a fragile breath before something larger stirred. The baby began to move more now, no longer lost in the fog of sleep. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes curious, her fingers exploring the edges of the shepherd's fur. She pressed her hand against his chest, then against the torn edge of his ear again, as though she recognized the scar already. Her touch carried no fear, only certainty. And each time, he allowed it. He, who had growled at me for even shifting my weight, let her trace his wounds as though they were hers to keep. I found myself wondering how long they had been together. Days? Weeks? Long enough for her to learn his shape, his scent, his warmth. Long enough for him to accept that his life was no longer his own. The silence pressed harder, and I thought again of the scrap of blanket still lying nearby. A piece of their trail, a marker of what they had already endured. I reached toward it once more, brushing it from the gravel, letting the damp fabric hang heavy in my hand. This time, when the shepherd's eyes found me, there was no sharp warning. There was weariness, yes, a demand for respect, but not the same wall as before. The baby noticed the movement. Her eyes followed the blanket, and she let out a sound, a breathy hum, almost like recognition. She reached toward it, her fingers fumbling in the air. I froze, unsure whether to bring it closer or hold it still. The shepherd lowered his head, brushing her hand back to his chest. Yet his eyes lingered on me, not with anger, but with something closer to acceptance. A silent command. Wait, not yet. So I did. The minutes stretched into hours. The lot, forgotten by the world, became a sanctuary of sorts. But I knew it could not last. A place like this does not keep secrets for long. Someone would see. Someone would ask. And still the child's presence deepened. She began to shift more boldly, rolling slightly against his chest, pressing her forehead into his fur. She made sounds now, soft and broken, not words but pieces of language forming in her throat. Each sound was followed by his response, the brush of his nose, the steady beat of his breath against her. A rhythm, back and forth, their own unspoken lullaby. I felt my chest ache with the sight, not only because it was beautiful but because it was what I had lost. Once, long ago, I had imagined a child in my arms, a voice calling me by name. That dream had died in hospital rooms and rain-soaked nights. And now, watching her cling to him, I felt both the sting of grief and the flicker of something like healing. The shepherd turned his gaze back to me then, steady and unblinking. His body was still tense, still protective, But his eyes no longer burned with the same sharpness. Instead, they held a question, silent but heavy. "What will you do?" With this I had no answer, not yet, but I knew this much: their bond was sacred. It could not be broken by force nor explained by reason. It simply was. The day pressed on, shadows shifting across the lot. The baby dozed again, her hand still tangled in his fur. And as the silence deepened, I felt the truth settle over me. This was no accident. They had not simply stumbled into each other's arms. Their lives had collided for a reason, though I could not yet see what it was. The shepherd shifted once more, carefully, his body curling even tighter around her. His ribs shuddered with the effort, but he did not release her, and I knew then that whatever road had brought them here had cost him everything. The baby breathed softly, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with his. And in that fragile moment I saw it clearly. They were no longer separate lives, they were one. And the world outside that lot, the world waiting beyond the silence, would not understand, not yet, but soon it would have to. The day stretched long, though time itself seemed fractured in that forgotten corner of the city. The sun crept higher, warming the cracked pavement, and still the German shepherd refused to leave his vigil. His chest rose and fell steadily, his ears twitching at every distant sound, his gaze fixed on the baby as though the world itself existed only in the span of her breath. I lingered still, caught in a silence that was both unbearable and holy. I had told myself I would only watch a while longer, only until the rain-soaked earth dried, until the child stirred more fully. But I did not move. I could not. The baby shifted again, rolling lightly against his side. Her eyes opened clear, unclouded, curious. This time, instead of clinging instantly to his fur, she reached upward, stretching her tiny fingers toward the sky as though testing the air itself. The shepherd lifted his head to follow her movement, his ears flicking at the faint sounds drifting across the lot. For the first time since I had arrived, I realized something. The world beyond us was stirring. A car rumbled faintly in the distance, its hum carried strangely clear by the emptiness around us. Somewhere further away, a door slammed, sharp and abrupt. Voices, faint, muffled, carried by the morning air, reached us in broken fragments. The shepherd stiffened, his muscles coiled, his body forming an instinctive barrier once more. His head lowered close to the baby, a low rumble in his chest. That seemed less a threat and more a vow. Nothing passes. Nothing harms her. The child, sensing his shift, curled against him again, her fingers grasping at his fur as though his strength were hers to command. She made no sound, no cry, only trust. I felt it was on the edge of something encroaching, a reminder that their fragile sanctuary could not hold forever. I glanced toward the edges of the lot, where weeds grew tall against rusting chain-link fences. Beyond them lay streets, homes, people, a city that carried on oblivious to what lay here. How long could they remain unseen? How long before chance or curiosity brought someone closer? The thought filled me with both dread and urgency, for part of me knew discovery would shatter this stillness, perhaps even tear them apart. And yet, another part whispered that maybe discovery was the only path forward. The shepherd's eyes found me again, as if he had read the shape of my thoughts. His gaze held steady, unwavering, almost accusatory. Do not betray this. Do not bring them here. But the world had its own designs. A sudden crack split the silence, a board snapping somewhere beyond the fence, maybe a child's careless step, maybe just wood surrendering to rot. But it was enough. The shepherd surged upright, his body tense, his teeth bared toward the sound. The baby cried out then, startled not by the noise itself but by the sudden loss of his steady warmth. Her voice, thin, high, piercing, broke the fragile hush that had cloaked us all morning. It echoed through the lot, carried over the fence, spilling into the open air beyond. I froze. The shepherd turned instantly, lowering his body again, pressing, himself against her, shushing her with the rhythm of his breath. She clutched at him desperately, her cries dissolving into hiccuping sobs, until at last she quieted once more. But the damage had been done. From beyond the fence, silence followed. A silence that was not empty, but listening. The shepherd knew it too. His ears pricked, his eyes fixed on the far corner where the chain link sagged against a leaning post. His whole body trembled, not with fear, but with the anticipation of intrusion. And I understood then. The world was already at their doorstep. The baby, soothed once more, nestled against him, her small breath steadying in rhythm with his. She was unaware of what her voice had summoned. But I was not. And neither was he. I shifted slightly, testing the weight of the blanket still in my hand. The damp fabric clung to my fingers, heavier now with meaning. Was it a lifeline? A tether to some past that might claim her? Or was it simply a symbol of what she had already left behind? The shepherd's eyes met mine again, sharper this time, filled with something close to pleading and warning all at once. His message was clear. If they come, I will not let them take her. The hours that followed stretched taut with tension. Every sound beyond the fence felt amplified. A laugh in the distance, the squeak of bicycle wheels, the metallic echo of a trash can lid falling shut. Each noise pulled his attention, his ears twitching, his body coiling tighter around her. And yet, despite it all, she slept. Secure in the cradle of his warmth, untouched by the fear that gnawed at the edges of our fragile world. I thought then of stories whispered in old corners of the city, stories of soldiers who had trusted their dogs more than their comrades, who had followed them into darkness because only the dog knew the way back out. Perhaps this was the same. Perhaps she too trusted him not because she chose to, but because something in her soul recognized he was the path home. The shadows grew longer. The sun, which had once promised safety, now felt like a clock running down. Soon evening would come, and with it eyes would turn outward, neighbors stepping onto porches, families walking the streets, the city no longer blind. The shepherd seemed to know this. He rose at last, his body stiff but determined. Carefully, he nudged the baby with his nose, urging her awake. She stirred, reluctant, murmuring soft protests only a child could make. But he persisted, gentle yet firm, until her eyes opened once more. She looked at him confused, then at me, and then she did something that froze me in place. She lifted her hand this time, not toward him, but toward me. Her fingers stretched, trembling in the fading light, reaching across the space that had always divided us. The shepherd stilled, his body taut, his eyes flicking from her hand to my face. He did not growl this time. He did not block her. He only watched. I felt my breath catch, my chest heavy with the weight of the choice before me. To take her hand, even gently, was to cross a threshold. To refuse was to deny the bond she was offering. Slowly, I lowered myself to the ground, careful not to startle either of them. I extended my own hand toward hers, leaving the air between us fragile, trembling, waiting. Her fingers brushed mine. It was the lightest touch, no more. Then a whisper of skin against skin, but it was enough. Enough to change something in the air, enough to deepen the silence into something alive. The shepherd did not move. His eyes bore into me, heavy with unspoken warning, but he did not pull her back. And in that moment, I knew. The world was coming. The silence could not last, but before it arrived, she had chosen to extend her circle outward, to let me into their fragile, holy bond. The question was not whether the outside world would come, it was whether we would be ready when it did. The baby's fingers slipped away, returning to his fur as her eyes drifted closed once more. As he shepherd lowered his head, resting it across her small body, his gaze never leaving mine. And as the last light of the day bled into shadow, I felt it. The first threads of trust had been woven, but trust, I knew, was fragile, and soon it would be tested. The dusk of that day carried a weight unlike any other. Shadows thickened, stretching long across the broken pavement of the lot, wrapping themselves around the three of us as if to conceal what the world was not meant to see. The baby slept again, her fragile chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, while the German shepherd's eyes never once closed. He remained a sentinel, still as stone, yet humming with tension, his ears twitching at each distant stir. And me. I sat frozen in the strange space between witness and intruder, My hand still tingled faintly where her tiny fingers had brushed against mine. That contact, so brief, so impossibly light, had stitched me to them in ways I had not expected. I was no longer just a shadow observing their bond. I was part of the fragile thread that held them together. But even as I clung to the moment, I felt it unraveling. The silence beyond the fence no longer felt empty. It was listening, waiting. The voices of the city carried closer than they had before. A cough, a laugh, a clatter of shoes on pavement. Each sound tugged at the shepherd's attention, his body stiffening, his eyes cutting toward every faint disturbance. He knew their hidden world would not remain hidden much longer. The baby stirred, murmuring softly in her sleep, and he lowered his head to soothe her with a breath, the tip of his nose brushing against her forehead. She quieted instantly. That simple exchange of his protection, her trust, seemed almost sacred, yet it was also fragile, and I feared what would happen once the world intruded. The question gnawed at me. Who would claim her? Who had left her? A mother searching desperately, a family torn apart, or no one at all. The damp blanket I still clutched told no stories, carried no names. It was only fabric, soaked and heavy, a symbol of abandonment without context. I thought of the shepherd. Then, had he been left behind too? Cast away unwanted until fate thrust this child into his care? Or had he chosen her for reasons beyond human understanding? His eyes, dark and deep, gave no answers, only the relentless vow of protection that bound him. The air grew colder as the sun bled into the horizon. With it came a new sound, low, steady, mechanical. At first I thought it was a trick of the ears, but then the hum grew louder, clearer. A vehicle. The shepherd heard it too. His ears pricked sharply, his body tense as he shifted to stand. He did not growl, not yet. Instead, he stepped in front of the baby, his body forming a barrier between her and the sound. His tail lowered, rigid, as though anchoring him in place. The hum deepened, then slowed. Tires crunching against gravel, headlights flaring faintly against the slats of the sagging fence. I felt my breath seize. Someone had come. The baby, still half asleep, whined softly, sensing the shepherd's change in posture. He glanced back at her, a quick flick of reassurance, before returning his gaze forward. The vehicle stopped. Its engine idled, the steady vibration of its presence filling the stillness. I dared not move. A car door opened, creaking in protest. Footsteps crunched on gravel, hesitant but firm. Then a voice, a man's voice, faint but distinct, cut through the dim. "Hello?" The shepherd's growl rolled out then, low and thunderous, vibrating through the ground itself. It was no longer the muted warning he had given me. This was different. This was territory claimed, line drawn. The baby whimpered, clutching at the sound of his growl, but he did not retreat. His body remained steady, his voice deep and unyielding. The footsteps still stood. Silence stretched, taut and dangerous. And then the man spoke again, softer this time. "Easy, boy. Easy." My chest tightened. Whoever he was, he had heard the child's earlier cries. He had followed the sound. And now he stood just beyond the fence, unknowingly poised on the edge of their fragile sanctuary. The shepherd advanced a step, his teeth bared, the growl growing sharper. His eyes burned, his body poised to strike if the line was crossed. The man seemed to sense it too, for his footsteps retreated a pace. The baby stirred again, her voice rising into a thin wail. The shepherd glanced back instantly, torn between guarding the front and soothing her. His growl faltered, breaking into a whine of conflict. And in that moment, I understood the depth of his bond. He was not a dog simply defending a territory. He was a guardian torn between two dangers, the stranger beyond the fence and the distress of the child behind him. The man's voice cut through again, firmer now. "Is someone there?" "A baby." The shepherd's snarl drowned him out, sharp and defiant. I pressed myself further into the shadows, my heart pounding. I could feel the inevitability pressing down the world had arrived. The silence that had cradled them was no longer a shield. It was a curtain about to fall. Yet the man did not advance. He lingered, uncertain, perhaps wary of the growl that promised pain. After a long pause, his footsteps retreated. The car door creaked once more, the engine roared to life, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving only the echo of its intrusion behind. The shepherd remained rigid long after the sound had faded, his body a fortress over the baby. Only when her soft coos returned tiny. Trembling, seeking his warmth, did he at last relent, lowering himself beside her once more. She reached for him, and he bent his head, letting her fingers grasp his fur. The growl was gone, replaced by a deep, shuddering breath, relief perhaps, or exhaustion. But I knew what it meant. This was only the beginning. The baby's cry had broken the silence. The man's curiosity had brushed against their fragile sanctuary. Others would come. More voices, more questions, more threats to the bond that held them. And the shepherd, no matter how fierce, could not snarl away the entire world. The night descended fully then, cloaking the lot in darkness. The city beyond seemed alive with distant hums and murmurs, but here, inside these rusting fences, the two of them curled into each other once more. The baby's breath slowed into sleep, her tiny hand clutching his fur as if it were the only anchor she knew. The shepherd's eyes remained open, glowing faintly in the moonlight, fixed always, on the fence, on the world just beyond. And I, still bound by the weight of what I had witnessed, knew we stood at the edge of something that could not be undone. The silence had cracked, the world was listening, and soon it would come. After the car had gone, after the man's uncertain footsteps faded, the fragile stillness that once wrapped the lot in secrecy was fractured. It was not just the memory of intrusion, it was the way sound seemed to carry differently now, sharper, closer. The whisper of voices from the street seemed to pause at the edges of the fence. The faint rumble of engines lingered like watchful eyes. Even the wind, slipping between the rusted links, felt changed, like a messenger carrying warnings from the world beyond. The baby sensed it too. Though her body was small and fragile, her instincts caught the unease. She stirred often, shifting in her sleep, her whimpers rising like fragile signals into the dark. Each time the shepherd answered with his presence curling closer, brushing his nose against her cheek, breathing his calm into her. But even he could not hide the tension etched into the set of his shoulders or the sharp flick of his ears. The night deepened, the hours stretching thin. I remained where I was, rooted by a pull I could not name. Perhaps it was fear that kept me from leaving, the fear that if I turned away they would vanish, swallowed by the world before I could return. Or perhaps it was duty, unasked yet undeniable, to see them through this fragile vigil. The shepherd never slept. His eyes remained fixed on the fence, glowing faintly in the sheen of moonlight. From time to time he rose to pace, slow and measured, his paws brushing against the gravel with a sound that whispered of both patience and warning. Then, near midnight, the voices came again. This time, more than one. Two shadows moved along, the street beyond, their conversation breaking the air with careless laughter. They were young men, perhaps barely grown. Their steps were unsteady, their words loose and slurred by the heavy hand of drink. Heard it was down here. Crying, they said. Now you're hearing stories, ain't no baby out here, I swear I heard it. Some mutt guarding it too. The shepherd froze. His body pressed low to the ground, his ears slicing forward, his eyes narrow and burning. The baby whimpered faintly at his sudden stillness, but he did not move to comfort her. His focus was absolute. I felt the air thin. These were not voices of concern. They were voices of curiosity, the kind that crept too close, that sought spectacle over salvation. Their footsteps scraped closer. One of them rattled the fence, the metal groaning in protest. The baby startled, her cry sharp and sudden in the night. That was all it took. The shepherd exploded forward with a sound that split the dark. His growl, no longer held back, tore through the air like thunder. He struck the fence with his weight, the metal clanging under the force, his teeth bared, his body a storm of fury. The men staggered back, their laughter breaking into startled shouts. "Jesus, did you see? Dog's mad, come on, let's go." Their voices cracked, retreating quickly into the distance, their footsteps scattering against the pavement. The sound of their panic dissolved into the city's hum, leaving only the ringing echo of the shepherd's defiance. He remained there, long after they had gone, pressed against the fence, his chest heaving with growls that rippled low and dangerous. His eyes blazed in the shadows, daring anyone to return. The baby cried harder, her fragile voice straining against the air. At last the shepherd turned back, rushing to her side. He pressed his body close, nuzzling her with desperate gentleness, his growl breaking into a low whine. She clung to him with her tiny hands, burying her face into his fur, her sobs softening against his warmth. It was a cycle I had come to know well, his rage to guard her, his tenderness to soothe her, a balance he carried with impossible grace, though each encounter drained him further. I felt it then, the certainty pressing down on me. The whispers were spreading. Stories of a baby, of a dog, of cries in the night. The city was listening now, and curiosity would not be the only thing drawn here. Concern would come, authority would come, and with them, choices are too heavy to be ignored. The hours bled on. By the time the first blush of dawn brushed the horizon, the shepherd was still awake. His body curled protectively around the child, his ears twitching at every faint sound. The baby, worn by the night's turmoil, had finally sunk into deeper sleep. Her tiny hand rested on his paw as though she had found her anchor, her guardian, her world. The dawn light painted them in fragile gold, and for a moment it seemed almost peaceful. Yet peace was only an illusion, for as the city stirred awake, footsteps returned. Not careless ones this time, nor slurred with drink. These were steady, measured, the sound of purpose. Two figures appeared beyond the fence, neighbors perhaps. Their faces were lined not with curiosity but with concern. One carried a bag, the other clutched a phone. They moved slowly, cautiously, peering through the gaps in the fence. "I heard it again last night," one whispered. "There is a baby." The other nodded, eyes narrowing at the sight of the shepherd's hulking shadow. "And that dog won't let anyone close." The shepherd was on his feet again, his growl rising low and sharp. His fur bristled, his body blocking every inch of the baby from view. The neighbors stepped back instinctively, though their voices grew firmer. "We have to call someone. We can't just leave a child out here." Their words rang heavy in the air. They were not wrong, and yet the thought of strangers pulling apart what I had witnessed, the bond, the survival, the unspoken love, filled me with unease deeper than I could explain. The shepherd snarled again, his voice carrying across the lot like a vow. The neighbors lingered only a moment longer before retreating, their whispers fading down the street. But the promise in their voices lingered. They would return, and not alone. I looked back at the child and her guardian. She slept still, unaware of the gathering storm. He stood tall above her, unyielding, eyes locked on the fence as though he could already see the tide of footsteps that would one day cross it. The fragile world they had built was shrinking. Each cry, each whisper, each intrusion chipped away at the silence that once sheltered them, and as the sun rose higher, painting the rusted fences with fire, I knew this truth with absolute clarity. The world was not done with them. It was only just beginning to arrive. Morning rose, and with it, the fragile illusion of safety began to erode. The lot no longer belonged to silence. Where once only the shepherd's growl and the baby's cries echoed against rusted fences, now other sounds seeped in whispers carried on the wind, hurried footsteps pausing at corners, the faint glint of curious eyes through the gaps in chain link. The secret was out. The shepherd knew it. His pacing grew sharper, more restless. His head jerked toward every sound, his tail rigid, his body taut with warning. He was no longer only a guardian against chance intruders, he was a sentinel against the rising tide of the city itself. The baby stirred uneasily. Though the morning sun warmed her fragile body, the air carried tension she could not name. She clung more tightly to the shepherd's fur when she slept, her small fingers tangled as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. From beyond the fence, the first real attempt came. Two men and a woman, neighbors again, but different this time. They carried bags, bottles, blankets. Their faces were creased with worry, their voices hushed but firm. "There," one whispered, pointing. "She's right there." "And the dog?" another asked. The shepherd met their gaze before they could draw closer. His growl rose like thunder, deep and rattling, his body pressed low and ready. His eyes blazed with a fire that promised no passage. The baby whimpered at the sound, her cry faint, muffled in his fur. The woman clutched her chest. "We can't leave her like this. She'll die out here," but still none dared step forward. Her breath rose and fell against his chest, fragile and uneven yet alive, always alive. I watched them beneath the pale glow of the moon, the unlikely pair huddled in the dirt, shadows curling around them like a shield. They were a story the city did not yet understand, a mystery that stirred whispers and summoned strangers. But the world outside had decided one thing: their time hidden was over. The shepherd did not know what morning would bring. Nets, ropes, hands reaching for the child, perhaps worse. But he would meet it as he had met every threat, with teeth bared, heart unyielding, and a vow written not in words, but in action. The baby stirred faintly, her hand twitching, catching in his fur, gripping it weakly, even in her sleep. The bond was unspoken, fragile yet unbreakable. And as night deepened, one truth became clear: the storm was no longer approaching. It was here, waiting for the first light to break. The night stretched endlessly, but eventually even the longest shadows must yield. When dawn broke, it was not with warmth, but with a cold, silvery light that washed over the junkyard lot. The shepherd had not slept. His eyes were rimmed with fatigue, lids heavy, but he remained upright, coiled, ears flicking at every rustle of wind through the bent fence. His body shook from the strain of so many hours spent tense, guarding, waiting. The baby had fared little better. Her cries through the night had thinned into hoarse whimpers, punctuated by restless sleep. Hunger gnawed at her frail body, thirst tightened her lips, and every breath came shallow, uneven. Yet she clung to him still, her tiny fingers tangled in his thick fur, as if she knew instinctively that only this guardian stood between her and oblivion. The shepherd lowered his head and licked her forehead, each motion tender, deliberate, as though his tongue alone could wipe away her suffering. She stirred faintly at his touch, her eyelids fluttering but not fully opening. He pressed his body closer, willing his warmth into her. But even as he comforted her, he could not ignore the change in the air. The city was waking. The hum of distant engines rose steadily one by one, like insects stirring from their burrows. Doors slammed blocks away, muffled voices carried through alleyways. And then, unmistakably, the sound came, the low rumble of a vehicle, slowing, deliberate, drawing near. His ears snapped forward, his body tensed. Headlights returned, cutting through the dim light of morning. This time, more than one. The shepherd's growl began low, deep in his chest, vibrating through the baby, who whimpered faintly in response. He pressed his nose to her once, soothing her briefly before raising his head again, eyes blazing at the light spilling across the lot. Engines stopped. Doors opened. Heavy boots struck the ground. Voices, familiar, purposeful, the same tones as the night before, only sharper, edged with resolve. "Same spot," one called. "He hasn't moved." Another voice closer. "The baby's still alive." God, she's still alive. The shepherd rose fully now, towering over the child, hackles raised. His paws dug into the dirt, claws scraping metal beneath him. His throat thundered with a growl that did not waver. Then the sound came clinking, metallic, foreign. Equipment. Poles, nets, leashes. They had returned not with hesitation but with preparation. Animal control. Back with numbers. Back with tools. The shepherd's eyes darted across the fence as beams of light cut through again, brighter now in the pale morning. The voices circled, echoing off rusted walls, pressing inward. The baby stirred, sensing the tension, her weak cries breaking. The air like glass. She coughed, the sound dry, raw, cutting deep into the shepherd's chest. He bent and licked her face quickly, calming her as best he could, his body vibrating with the dual rhythm of growl and heartbeat. Outside, the voices grew closer. Careful. He's not giving her up without a fight. That's why we're here. Ready the net. The shepherd's teeth flashed, white and sharp. His growl deepened to a snarl, his stance widening, every line of his body screamed defiance. They circled the fence, searching for entry points. One rattled the gate, testing its rusted hinges. Another moved toward the far side, beam sweeping across twisted scrap metal. The shepherd pivoted constantly, never turning his back, his eyes flicking from shadow to light, every muscle drawn tight as a bowstring. The baby cried again, sharper, louder. Hunger had reached its breaking point, her body demanding what the shepherd could not provide. The sound cut through the men outside, freezing them mid-step. For just a moment, even hardened voices softened. "She won't last. We have to act now, then move. On my mark." Silence stretched, then boots scuffing against metal, hinges groaning. The gate began to shift. The shepherd exploded into motion, launching toward the sound with a snarl that tore through the morning air. His body slammed against the gate, rattling it violently, the impact echoing like thunder. The men outside cursed, stumbling back. "Easy, easy, don't spook him further." The shepherd didn't relent. His teeth snapped inches from the metal, his roar carrying the promise of blood. His body stood as a wall between the child and the intruders, his chest heaving, his eyes aflame. But even as he defied them, his own body betrayed him. Hunger clawed at his stomach, exhaustion burned in his legs. His breaths came ragged, shallow. The baby's cries pierced through, demanding comfort he struggled to give. The men regrouped, outside. "Two of us go in, nets ready. The others cover. Keep him distracted." The shepherd's ears twitched, his body shifting at the tone. He could not know the words, but he understood the intent. They were coming. He turned his head briefly, pressing his nose to the baby once more, steadying her cries, grounding himself in her fragile warmth. His gaze softened for a heartbeat. Then it hardened again as he faced the fence. Boots moved, metal scraped, hands pushed. The gate groaned wider, and the shepherd stepped forward to meet them. He stood tall, unyielding, every ounce of strength left in his weary body channeled into this single moment. His growl rolled through the lot like distant thunder, a warning carved from the depths of his soul. The baby cried louder, her small fists waving weakly, her voice carrying like a beacon. The shepherd did not waver, because though dawn had come, it was not light that filled the lot. It was battle. And he was ready. The groaning gate swung wider, scraping rust against rust, and in that drawn-out metallic scream, the shepherd knew what was coming. This moment, the one he had been bracing for through hours of rain, wind, and darkness, had arrived. Two figures stepped through, their silhouettes, bulky net poles raised like lances. Behind them more shadows waited, flashlights cutting lines across the junkyard. Their boots crunched against the gravel, measured, deliberate. The shepherd lowered his body slightly, head stretched forward, tail stiff, ears pinned tight to his skull. His teeth glistened with froth, his growl thundered through the skeletal lot. He was no longer just an abandoned dog. He was a wall, a sentinel, a beast forged in desperation. The baby's cries sharpened, ragged with thirst and hunger. The men flinched at the sound, hesitating for a heartbeat. It was all the shepherd needed. With an explosion of force, he launched. His paws slammed against the ground, scattering pebbles as he surged forward. The men jerked back, poles snapping upward instinctively, nets unfurling with a hiss of nylon. Through metal rings. The shepherd struck first. His jaws clamped around the edge of one net, teeth tearing at the woven strands. The man grunted, staggering, trying to wrench the pole free. The shepherd shook his head violently, ripping fibers apart, growling so ferociously it rattled the man's arms. "Hold him!" one shouted. The second swung his net wide, aiming for the shepherd's flank, but the dog's reflexes, sharpened by nights of surviving hunger and cold, were lightning. He twisted mid-motion, teeth releasing the first net just long, enough to spin and slam his body into the second pole. The impact jolted through the handler, sending him stumbling. The net snapped shut on empty air. The shepherd landed and spun back, lips curled, saliva spraying as he barked a sound so sharp, so guttural, it sent echoes bouncing off twisted car frames. The baby's cries grew frantic, fear piercing through every sound. The shepherd heard. Her felt her, and pivoted his stance, once again positioning his body squarely between her and the intruders. His chest heaved, his breaths tearing through him, but he stood tall, defiant. Outside the fence, More voices rose. "Don't hurt him. Just contain him. He's protecting the infant. Be smart. Don't rush him." But the two inside were already locked in the shepherd's storm. One advanced again, net raised like a spear. The shepherd's hackles bristled. He feinted left, then sprang right, clamping down on the pole's wooden shaft. His jaws crushed against it, splintering the surface, forcing the handler backward, with sheer force. The man cursed, twisting, trying to free himself. The shepherd snarled, tugging, dragging him half a step before finally releasing with a violent snap of his head. The pole clattered against the ground. The second man lunged. His net arced downward, and this time it brushed the shepherd's back, grazing fur. The nylon scraped across his skin, catching briefly. The shepherd erupted with fury. He twisted. Under it, jaws snapping, and with a burst of strength, tore the net loose before it could close. The fabric shredded under his teeth. His roar rose higher, primal, unyielding. The baby wailed louder, her tiny body trembling, fists clenched though she too fought alongside him. The men faltered. They had expected resistance, but not this storm, not this fire in the eyes of an abandoned dog. "He won't stop," one whispered hoarsely, stumbling back. The shepherd pressed forward, driving them away from the child, step by step, his presence overwhelming. For every inch they advanced, he reclaimed two. Outside the fence, the others shouted, "Pull back! Don't risk the kid, pull back!" The command tore through the air, and at last the two inside hesitated, retreating toward the gate. Their nets hung in tatters, their confidence shaken. The shepherd pursued only far enough to drive them out, his body rigid, his eyes blazing like fire against the pale dawn. When the gate clanged shut again, he returned swiftly to the baby, pressing his body against hers, licking her damp cheeks as she cried. His growl softened into a low whine, his heartbeat loud in the stillness. The men regrouped outside, breathless, shaken. He nearly tore through the net. "We can't take him by force. Not like this." "Then what?" "The baby won't last." Their voices lowered, fading into murmurs, but the shepherd remained coiled, watching every shadow through the gaps in the fence. He would not be fooled by retreat. They would come again stronger, better prepared. He pressed his muzzle against the baby's chest, inhaling her fragile warmth. Her cries weakened into whimpers, exhaustion overtaking her again. He curled tighter, shielding her from the world, his own body battered, his spirit burning. The dawn stretched on. The light grew stronger, shadows thinning, but the danger remained thick in the air. The shepherd's ears flicked at every sound, the scrape of boots outside, the distant bark of another stray, the hum of traffic awakening beyond the lot. He knew this was not over. The men would return, and when they did, he would stand again, even if it broke him. For now, though, the lot was still. The baby slept fitfully, her breaths shallow. The shepherd did not rest. His eyes stayed open, burning embers fixed on the horizon, because morning had come, but the storm was only beginning. The pale light of dawn gave way to a bleached, brittle morning. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the damp scent of rust, oil, and wet gravel. The shepherd remained coiled around the baby, every muscle in his body taut, his fur bristling at the faintest scrape beyond the fence. His eyes burned red from fatigue, but he would not close them, not while the world pressed in with claws unseen. The baby stirred, her tiny fists trembling, lips opening in a weak whimper. Her cry was thinner than before, stretched and fragile as though her strength was ebbing like the last flame of a candle. The shepherd lowered his head, nosing her face, urging her awake. But even his touch, warm and insistent, could not draw from her the vitality that had once rung sharp through the cold night. He whined softly, a sound thick with worry. His body tightened around her, his ribs shuddering with every breath. From beyond the fence, the men's voices drifted back into the lot. They had not left. They were waiting, planning. "Can't just leave her in there. She's running out of time. If she doesn't get fluid soon, we have one chance, but not with nets. He'll tear us apart again." The shepherd's ears twitched at every syllable. He did not understand the words, but he knew the tone, resolve, calculation. They were changing their approach. He pressed his muzzle against the baby once more, as though to anchor her, to remind himself of the life that tethered his fight. Hours crawled. The shepherd's body sagged under exhaustion. Every step he took across the gravel was slower now, his paws dragging slightly before lifting. He returned often to the baby, circling her, nuzzling her face, licking her tiny hands, as if urging her to cling to the world. But her cries weakened with each passing hour, fading into shallow whimpers, until at last she only shifted faintly against the cold, her breaths soft and uneven. The shepherd's panic grew. He whined louder, nudging her, pacing frantically around the little space. He pressed his chest to hers, sharing his warmth, his tongue sweeping across her damp cheeks. Still, she lay limp, fragile, so terribly quiet. Beyond the fence, the voices sharpened. She's shutting down. If we wait, we'll lose her. Then we don't wait. We go in, but differently this time. The shepherd froze, ears swiveling. The gravel outside shifted, boots crunching as shadows began to move again. The gate rattled, hinges groaning like a warning bell. The shepherd lowered, his head growling, rumbling low in his chest. He planted his paws wide, muscles quivering. He had already fought once, and he would fight again. Even if it drained the last ounce of life in him, he would not yield. The baby let out a faint, rattling cough. The sound split the morning like glass shattering. The shepherd whipped his head back, heart surging with dread. He licked her face, nudged her side, desperate for movement, for sound. Another cough came softer, weaker. Her chest rose shallowly, barely enough. The shepherd whined, then growled again as the gate scraped open wider. This time only one figure stepped inside. No net, no pole, his hands were empty. The shepherd's growl deepened, a thunderous warning that shook through his chest. His tail stiffened, ears pinned, every fiber of him coiled like a spring. But the man didn't advance. He lowered himself slowly, crouching onto the gravel. His voice carried across the space low, measured, not sharp like before. "It's okay, boy, easy now, I'm not here to fight." The shepherd snarled, teeth bared, saliva frothing at the corners of his mouth. He lunged forward a half-step, claws scraping stone. The man did not flinch. He simply spoke again, softer. "She's dying. You know it. You feel it. We don't have much time." The words meant nothing to the shepherd, but the tone seeped in. Not a threat, not a challenge. "Something else, please. Urgency." The shepherd's growl softened to a rumble, but he did not step back. His body remained braced, eyes locked on the figure. The man slowly pulled something from his jacket. Not a weapon, a small blanket. He spread it on the ground in front of him, palms open, movements deliberate. "You've done everything," he whispered. "You've kept her alive. But you can't save her alone." The shepherd barked once, sharp, teeth flashing. His heart pounded like war drums. He glanced at the baby, her lips pale, her breath shallow, her tiny chest rising faintly. He nudged her, whining, desperate. The man stayed still. Beyond the fence, the others held their silence, watching, waiting. The shepherd lowered his head, again curling his body tighter around the child, licking her damp forehead. His whines deepened, almost breaking into sobs. His body trembled. He did not want to leave her. He did not want to trust. But her breaths are so faint now, so fragile, pulled at something deeper. Instinct collided with desperation. He could protect her from nets, from hands, from shadows, but he could not protect her from the silence creeping closer with every weakening breath. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes blazing. He met the man's gaze with a stare that cut like steel. The man whispered again, "Let us help her." The shepherd snarled, one last wall of defiance, before lowering his head to the baby. He pressed his muzzle against her chest, listening. Her heart fluttered, faint, fading. He whined, long and low, a mournful note that seemed to pull at the air itself. Then, trembling, he shifted his body slightly, not away, but enough for the man to see her small form curled beneath him. The man inhaled sharply. His eyes widened at the sight of the fragile infant, pale, weak, wrapped in nothing but scraps of cloth, her guardian looming above her like a battered, defiant sentinel. He didn't move closer yet. He simply whispered, "Good boy." The shepherd's ears twitched. His body sagged, trembling. He did not yield, but he no longer barred the way completely. The man edged forward on his knees, inch by inch, his palms still open, his voice steady. The shepherd growled again, low, reluctant, but not the storm of before. He glanced back at the baby, then at the man. The weight of choice pressed against him, heavier than any chain. The baby coughed again, a faint, broken sound. The shepherd whined and licked her face desperately. His body trembled, torn. The man whispered, "Let me take her. Please." The shepherd pressed his head against the baby's chest one final time. He closed his eyes, his body shaking with a soundless cry. Then, inch by inch, he shifted, his body still closed, but no longer covering her completely. The man's hands shook as he reached forward. The shepherd's growl rose like a blade at his throat. But the man paused, waited, and let the dog see. The dog. Only when the shepherd's body sagged again did he continue. His hands touched the child gently, carefully. The shepherd tensed, growl low, eyes fixed. And yet, he allowed it. The man lifted the baby slowly, cradling her fragile form in the V blanket. Her tiny body seemed weightless, almost insubstantial. She let out a faint whimper, then went still. The shepherd's eyes followed every movement, his chest rising and falling in ragged bursts. The man stood slowly, turning toward the gate. The shepherd rose too, steps shaky, following close, his body never straying far. Beyond the fence, the others sprang into motion. The baby was rushed forward, voices calling, hands moving. The shepherd barked once sharp, commanding. His eyes burned with a single warning: "Harm her, and I will end you." The men understood, for now the shepherd had allowed them to take her. But his fight was far from over. The morning split open with urgency. The baby, bundled hastily in the blanket, was carried toward the waiting van, where lights flickered faintly in the drizzle. The men's voices overlapped in clipped tones, thick with command, worry, and something sharper than fear. Every second pressed against them like a closing fist. The shepherd followed at their heels, body low, tail stiff, growl deepening each time a hand came too near the child. He did not care for their words, their tools, their rushing feet. He cared only for the small, fragile bundle slipping away from him. As the men reached the van, its doors swung wide. Inside, boxes of supplies were scattered, a narrow cot waiting. One man climbed in quickly, spreading the blanket, ready to lay the baby down. The shepherd lunged forward, placing himself between the man and the cot, his teeth flashing. His body bristled, eyes burning with defiance. "Hold him back," one of the men barked. But no one moved, not after the warning growl that rolled from the dog's throat, low and steady, like thunder caged in his chest. The man holding the baby froze, torn between fear and urgency. The infant whimpered, then coughed weakly, her tiny body trembling in the blanket. That sound, thin and broken, ripped through the shepherd like a blade. He turned sharply, eyes softening, nose pushing close to the bundle. She smelled faint, too faint. His growl faltered, replaced by a high, trembling whine. His chest heaved, torn between instinct and desperation. He wanted her in his jaws, back beneath his body where nothing could touch her. But another instinct, newer, rawer, pulled against that old rhythm of protect and guard. This one whispered, "You cannot fix what's inside her." The man crouched, speaking softly. "Let me lay her down, please. She needs help now." The shepherd's body shook, every muscle drawn tight, his nose pressed once more to her cheek. Then, after a long, ragged moment, he shifted aside, not fully, but enough for the man to slide her onto the cot. As soon as she was down, the shepherd leapt into the van beside her, planting himself at her side, his body pressed against the edge of the cot like a wall of fur and teeth. His eyes flicked from one man to another, daring them closer. "She won't last long," one muttered, fumbling with a small kit of tools and tubes. Another voice answered sharply, "Then drive, now." The van roared alive. Tires spat gravel, engines growling. The shepherd's ears pinned back at the noise, but he did not move. His nose stayed pressed against the baby's tiny chest, where each shallow rise and fall carved deeper worry lines into his soul. The van jolted forward, carrying them through the empty morning streets. The city rolled past in blurs of concrete and rust, the air heavy with exhaust. The shepherd braced against the movement, his stance wide, eyes never leaving the child. The men worked quickly, hands moving in practiced rhythm. A mask, tubes, a small vial of fluid. Each time their hands came near, the shepherd growled but stayed still, his body vibrating with conflict. He hated their touch, hated their nearness, but he could not ignore the faint steadiness that began to return with each adjustment they made. Her breaths grew a fraction stronger, no longer rattling so harshly. Her lips, though still pale, no longer seemed as blue. The shepherd tilted his head, ears pricking. His tail twitched once, low, uncertain. He whined softly and licked her tiny hand where it lay limp at her side. The van swerved sharply, brakes squealing. The shepherd lurched, planting himself back at the cot, his nails scraping the floor. What the hell? Roadblock, ahead, move! The van screeched to a halt, its sudden silence filled only by the faint hiss of oxygen and the soft beeping of a monitor. The shepherd's hackles rose, his nose twitching. He smelled it before he saw the scent of strangers. Boots, smoke, something metallic, sharp, not unlike the poles that had tried to snare him. The back doors rattled violently. Out, now! A voice barked from outside. The men inside exchanged frantic glances. One reached for the baby instinctively, but froze when the shepherd snapped his jaws inches from his wrist. The dog's eyes burned like coals, his stance screaming one message: "No one takes her but me." The doors were wrenched open. Harsh daylight spilled in, blinding for a moment. Figures loomed outside, silhouettes, helmets, rifles glinting. The shepherd's growl tore through the van like a blade. His chest swelled, his teeth bared, his stance rigid. He placed himself between the baby and the open doors, his eyes locked on the intruders. "Easy!" someone shouted. "We don't want to hurt her." But the shepherd's world had narrowed again, reduced to the heartbeat at his side and the shadows reaching in. His body surged forward, lips curled, ears pinned flat. He would tear through steel itself before letting them near her. One of the men inside raised his hands. "Wait, don't rush him, he won't let go, we need another way." The figures outside hesitated, rifles lowering slightly. Their eyes flicked between the child, the men, and the beast that had planted himself. As her unmovable guardian, the shepherd's heart thundered. He could smell the tension in the air, thick and electric, like a storm before lightning struck. His tail lashed once, hard, a signal as clear as any words: "I will not back down." The baby whimpered faintly. The sound cut through the chaos like a thread of silver. The shepherd whipped his head back, his growl softening instantly. He pressed his nose against her again, licking her damp cheek, whining softly. The intruders shifted uneasily. "We don't have time," one hissed. "Then distract him, get the baby out." "No," another voice snapped. "You rush him, he'll kill her before we get close." The van's walls seemed to shrink, the air thick with fear, the baby's faint breaths weaving fragile between all the noise. The shepherd's ears flicked between voices, his eyes darting, calculating. His world balanced on a knife's edge, every instinct screaming to strike, to rend, to spill blood. And yet his nose pressed once more to the child's chest, and his growl faltered into a tremble. He could not leave her. He could not fail her. But the circle outside tightened, shadows closing in. And the shepherd knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of quiet dread. The German shepherd remained a shadow at my side, his presence an anchor in a world that felt increasingly unstable. The baby, too, seemed to cling more tightly to me now, as if he sensed the unease that radiated through the walls of the old house. His small fingers curled around my shirt, his soft breath rising and falling against my chest. I tried to keep us safe inside, where the broken curtains dimmed the outside light, and the cracked window panes muffled the sound of distant engines on the road. But safety was an illusion, fragile, temporary. The men had not returned, not yet, but their absence was no comfort. It was worse. Like the calm before a storm, silence stretched too long, and in that silence my mind rehearsed every possibility of what might come. Each night, as the snow fell heavier, I found myself waking, in intervals, startled by the smallest creak of wood or rush of wind. And every time I woke, the shepherd was already there, sitting upright near the baby's crib. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the moonlight through the broken window. He never closed them for long, never surrendered fully to sleep. He was always listening, always waiting. It was on the fourth night after the men's visit that I heard the sound again of the crunch of tires over snow, faint but deliberate. My body went rigid, and I sat up before the shepherd even moved. His ears twitched, then angled sharply forward. A low rumble started in his throat, not loud, but enough to vibrate through the floorboards where I sat. I held my breath. The baby stirred, let out a soft cry, then settled again as I pressed him against me. My heart hammered so violently I thought it would wake him. The sound of the tires grew closer, then stopped. No door slammed, no footsteps followed, only stillness. The shepherd shifted, his nose pointing toward the front door. His whole body quivered with tension, his fur bristling under the pale wash of moonlight. He looked back at me once, and in that brief exchange I felt his silent warning. They're here. I didn't move. I couldn't. Fear had rooted me to the floor, yet in the same breath a strange calm wrapped around me. I had been preparing for this moment, in ways I hadn't fully understood. The house had become a cocoon, but it was fragile and it could be broken. And when it broke, the only thing that mattered was whether I could protect the two souls who had been entrusted to me. Minutes stretched. The sound outside did not return. No knock came at the door. No window shattered. Just silence, heavier than before, pressing against the walls. Eventually the shepherd lowered himself to the ground, though he kept his head raised, eyes fixed on the door. His growl subsided into a steady whine that seemed to pulse with unease. I reached out, resting my trembling hand on his back. His muscles were taut, ready to spring. We stayed that way until the first light of dawn began to seep through the torn curtains. Only then did I dare to move, to rise quietly, and peer through the frost-coated glass. Outside the road was empty, the snow covering any tracks that might have been there, but I knew what I had heard, and the shepherd knew it too. That day passed slowly, each hour dragging beneath the weight of waiting. I carried the baby close, pacing the rooms, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. The shepherd followed with silent footsteps, never more than a few feet away. He had become more than a guardian. He was a mirror to my own fear and, yet also a reminder of something stronger. He didn't hesitate, didn't doubt. He simply watched and waited and prepared. In the afternoon, I went to the back of the house where an old cellar door had been boarded up. The boards were brittle, softened by years of rot. With careful effort, I pried them loose one by one, revealing a narrow stairwell that descended into the dark. The air that rose from below was damp and bitterly cold, but it was hidden, concealed. I thought of it not as escape, but as refuge, a place to go if the men forced their way inside. It wasn't much, but it was something. The baby could be hidden, there with blankets to shield him from the cold. The shepherd could stand guard at the stairs, and I would find my role when the time came. When night fell again, I stayed near the cellar, restless, my ears straining for the faintest sound. The shepherd paced too, his claws clicking softly on the worn wood of the floor. The baby slept in the crib, one small fist tucked beneath his cheek, oblivious to the weight pressing down on us. The storm outside had thickened. Snow blew sideways, rattling against the windows, moaning through the gaps in the walls. It was a sound that both concealed and exposed us. No one could hear us inside, but neither could we hear them if they returned. And then, just past midnight, the shepherd stopped pacing. His body froze, nose raised, ears pricked. I froze with him. Through the howl of the storm, I caught it. A faint metallic scrape, like something brushing against the front door. My stomach dropped. The shepherd's growl rolled low and dangerous, filling the air between us. He moved forward slowly, every muscle coiled. I clutched the baby, who had stirred at the sound, pressing my cheek to his head to steady my own trembling. Another sound followed the soft rattle of the doorknob turning. My breath caught. It turned once, twice, slowly, testing. The shepherd lunged forward, barking sharply this time, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms like thunder. The sound startled even me. The baby cried out, his wails high and thin. The doorknob still. Silence again, only the storm outside. The shepherd stood rigid before the door, teeth bared, hackles raised. His bark had been a warning, and whoever was outside had heard it. Whether they would heed it or not, I didn't know. Minutes passed, long, grueling minutes. No further sound came. At last, I forced myself to move. With shaking hands, I rocked the baby until his sobs faded into hiccups, then soft whimpers. I laid him gently back in the crib, though my body screamed not to leave his side. The shepherd remained at the door long after, unmoving, the storm still howling around us. And in that long, tense silence, a truth settled heavy in my chest. We were running out of time. They would come again, stronger, more determined, and when they did, we would have no choice but to face them. The baby breathed softly in his sleep. The shepherd's growl lingered in the air. I sat on the cold floor beside them both, my back against the wall, my eyes fixed on the door, and whispered into the darkness, "Not while I'm here. Not while he's here. You won't take him from us." The storm swallowed my words, but the shepherd's ears twitched, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw him nod. The storm did not end. It clawed at the house for 2 full days, a relentless battering of snow and wind that turned the world outside into a blur of white nothingness. The windows rattled as if the house itself wanted to shiver apart, and the roof moaned under the weight of ice. I barely slept. The baby stirred often, restless from the cold, his cries muffled against my chest. I wrapped him in layer after layer of blankets, pressing my own body heat into him. His warmth was the only tether that kept me from drifting into despair. The shepherd never left his post near the front door. His paws wore grooves into the wood as he paced, occasionally stopping to growl softly at nothing visible. His ears twitched toward sounds I couldn't hear, his instincts sharper than mine, reminding me that whatever waited beyond the storm had not given up. At times I thought I saw shadows moving in the white blur outside, dark shapes sliding between the trees, there and gone in an instant. But when I blinked and strained my eyes, there was nothing, only snow, only wind. I began to wonder if the storm itself was keeping them at bay, or if it was hiding their approach. On the third night, exhaustion forced me into a shallow sleep, though my mind never fully let go. It was the baby's sudden cry that dragged me back into consciousness. His wail split the silence, high-pitched and frantic. I sat up, clutching him, whispering to soothe him. But before my voice could calm him, I heard something else. A knock. Not a crash, not a rattle of the doorknob this time, just a knock. 3 sharp raps against the wood, so clear they cut through the storm like a blade. The baby screamed harder, his little body trembling in my arms. My breath caught in my throat. The shepherd exploded forward, barking with a fury that shook the walls. His teeth flashed in the dim light, his entire body a weapon ready to strike. His bark wasn't a warning this time, it was a promise. Another knock followed. Louder, slower, deliberate. I froze, clutching the baby so tightly he whimpered against my shoulder. My eyes darted to the cellar door in the corner, half open now, the darkness yawning below. My plan had been simple: hide the baby there, keep him safe while I faced whatever came. But now, as the sound echoed through the house, I couldn't bring myself to leave him, not even for a second. The shepherd barked again, claws scraping against the floor as he lunged toward the door, but I whispered sharply, "Wait." My voice trembled, but he stopped. He growled, low and vicious, but his body held still. He looked back at me, eyes burning. The knocking ceased. Silence followed. I strained to hear past the baby's whimpers, past the storm's howling, but nothing else came. Minutes dragged. My pulse thundered in my ears. Finally, the shepherd turned his head slightly, nose lifting toward the broken window. He sniffed once, twice, then growled again, softer this time, but more certain. Whoever had been outside was still there. I didn't light a lamp. Darkness was my ally. If they wanted to come inside, they would come blind, stumbling. I would not give them the advantage of light. Instead, I sat in the corner with the baby bundled in my arms, whispering lullabies through my chattering teeth. My eyes never left the door. The shepherd crouched low beside it, ready, his growl a constant rumble in the floorboards. Hours passed. No further sound came, no more knocks. When dawn finally broke, I dared to look outside. Through the frosted glass I saw faint impressions in the snow leading up to the porch footprints, half buried by the storm, but undeniably human. They trailed away into the white blur of the trees. I closed the curtain quickly, bile rising in. My throat. It was not a dream, not paranoia. They had been here, and they would come again. That day, I prepared. I gathered what little food we had and placed it near the cellar, arranging blankets to make a crude bed for the baby. I carried an old rusted hatchet down there too, though its weight in my hand felt foreign, clumsy. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. The shepherd followed me, watching silently as I arranged things. His nose twitched at the damp air, his tail still, his body tense. He didn't trust this place, neither did I, but it was all we had. When I finished, I sat on the cellar stairs for a long time, baby asleep against my chest, the shepherd's warm body pressed against my legs. The silence was thick, broken only by the baby's soft breaths and the faint crackle of ice outside. I whispered into the darkness, my voice so soft I barely recognized it as my own. They won't take you. Not while I'm alive. Not while he's here. The shepherd's ears twitched. He pressed his head against my knee, a gesture that felt both reassuring and solemn, as if he too knew the promise I was making. That night, the storm eased at last. The silence it left behind was worse. Without the wind's constant howl, every sound in the house stood naked, sharp, impossible to ignore. The creak of wood,